Chapter 13, Part 3 of More Love to Thee, The Life and Letters of Elizabeth Prentiss. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kristen Hand. More Love to Thee, The Life and Letters of Elizabeth Prentiss by George Prentiss. Chapter 13, Part 3. Change of Home and Life in New York, a book about Robbie, her sympathy with young people. I have in me two different natures. What Dr. DeWitt said at the grave of his wife, the way to meet little trials, faults in prayer meetings, how special theories of the Christian life are formed, sudden illness of Professor Smith, publication of Golden Hours, how it was received. Her return from Dorset brought with it a new order of life. The transfer of her husband to a theological chair was almost as great a change to her as to him. In ceasing to be a pastor's wife, she gave up a position which for more than a quarter of a century had been to her a spring of constant joy, and which, notwithstanding its cares, she regarded as one of the most favored on earth. While in the parsonage, too, she was in the midst of her friends. The removal to 61st Street left the most of them at the distance, and distance in New York is no slight hindrance to the full enjoyment of social intimacy and fellowship. Several weeks after the return to town were devoted to the congenial task of fitting up and adorning the new home. Then, for the first time in many years, she found herself at leisure, and one of its earliest fruits was a selection of stray religious verses for publication, which, however, soon gave way to a volume of her own. She was able also to give special attention to her favorite religious reading. The sharp trials and sufferings of the previous years showed their effect in deepened spiritual convictions, humility and tenderness of feeling, but not in repressing her natural playfulness. At times her spirits were still buoyant with fun and laughter. An extract from a letter to her youngest daughter, who with her sister was on a visit at Portland, will give a glimpse of this gay mood. Such mishaps as she recounts are liable to occur in the best regulated households, especially on a change of servants, but they were rare in her experience, and so the more amused her. I undertook to get up a nice dinner for Dr. and Mrs. V., about which I must now tell you. First, I was to have raw oysters on the shell. Blunder first, small tea plates laid for them. Ordered off, and big ones laid. Blunder second, 5 oysters to be laid on each plate, instead of which 5 were placed on platters at each end, making 10 in all for the whole party. Order to change to the original order. Result, a terrific sound in the parlor of rushing feet and bombardment of oyster shells. Dinner was announced from Dr. P., who asked helplessly where he should place Mrs. V. Blunder fourth by Mrs. P., who remarked that she had got 50 pieces of shell in her mouth. Blunder fifth by Dr. P., who failed to perceive that the boiled chickens were garnished with a stunning wine jelly, and regarding it as gizzards, presented it only to the boys. Blunder sixth, cranberry jelly ordered, cranberry as a dark inky fluid instead, gazed upon suspiciously by the guests, and tasted sparingly by the family. And now prepare for blunder number 7, bearing in mind that it is the third course. 4 prairie hens instead of 2. The effect on the Reverend Mrs. E. Prentiss was a resort to her handkerchief, and suppression of tears on finding none in her pocket. Blunder 8th, Yauch's biscuit glacé stuffed with a hideous orange peel. Delight first, delicious dessert of farina smothered in custard and dear to the heart of Dr. V. Blunder 9th, no hot milk for the coffee, delay in scalding it, and at last serving it in a huge cracked pitcher. Blunder 10th, bananas, grapes, apples, and oranges forgotten at the right moment and passed after the coffee, and of course declined. But hearing that Miss H. V. was fond of bananas, I seized the fruit basket and poured its contents into one napkin, and a lot of chocolate cake into another, and sent them to the young princesses in the parsonage, who are, no doubt, dying of indigestion this morning. Give my love to C and F, and a judicious portion to the old birds. To a young friend, October 19th, 1873. I am sorry that we played hide-and-go-seek with each other when you were in town. I've seen all my most intimate friends since I came home. I mean all who live here. There are just 8 of them, but they fill my heart so that I should have said, at a guess, there were 80. Try the experiment on yourself and tell me how many such friends you have. It is very curious. I have just got a hold of some leaves of a journal rescued from the flames by my future husband, written at the age of 22, in which I describe myself as one great long sunbeam. It recalled the sweet life in Christ I was then leading, and made me feel that if I had got so far on as a girl, I ought to be infinitely farther on as a woman. Still, in spite of all shame and regrets, I had a long list of mercies to recount at the communion table today. Among other things, I feel that I know and love you better than heretofore, and it is pleasant to love. I must not forget to answer your little niece's questions. I remember her father's calling with your sister, but I don't remember any little girl as being with them, much less kissing her because she liked the Susie books. As to writing more about Robbie, I can't do that till I get to heaven, where he has been ever so many years. Give my love to the wee maiden, and tell her I should love to kiss her. No trait in Mrs. Prentiss was more striking than her sympathy with young people, especially with young girls, and her desire to be religiously helpful to them. But her interest in them was not confined to the spiritual life. She delighted to join them in their harmless amusements, and to take her part in their playful contests, whether of wit or knowledge. Her friend Miss Morse thus recalls this feature of her character. In Mrs. Prentiss' life, the wise man's saying, "A merry heart doeth good like a medicine," was beautifully exemplified. Yet few were thoroughly acquainted with this phase of her character. Those who knew her only through her books or her letters of Christian sympathy and counsel, many even who came into near and tender personal relations to her, failed to see the frolicsome side of her nature which made her an eager participant in the fun of young people. In a merry group of girls, the merriest girl among them. In contests where playful rhymes were to be composed at command, on a moment's notice, she sharpened the wits of her companions by her own zest, but in most cases herself bore off the palm. She always entered into such contests with an unmistakable desire to win. I remember one evening in her home in Dorset, when 4 of us were engaged in a game of verbarium, 2 against 2. The opposite party were gaining rapidly. She suddenly turned to her partner with a comical air of chagrin and exclaimed, "Why is it they are winning the game? You and I are a great deal brighter than they." The first time I ever saw Mrs. Prentiss was through an invitation to her home to meet about half a dozen young persons of my own age. She was in one of her merriest moods. Games of wit were played, and she took part with genuine interest. She at once impressed me with the feeling that she was one of us, and that this arose from no effort to be sympathetic, but was simply part of her nature. This brightness wonderfully attracted young people to her, and gave her an influence with them that she could not otherwise have exercised. She recognized it in herself as a power, and used it, as she did all her powers, for the service of her Master. Young Christians, seeing that her deeply religious life did not interfere with her keen enjoyment of all innocent pleasures, realized that there need be no gloominess for them either, in a life consecrated to God. Just as her line of thought would often lie absorbingly in some one direction for quite a period of time, so her fun ran in streaks, as she would have been likely to express it. One winter she amused herself and her friends by a great number of charades and enigmas, many of which I copied and still possess. They were dashed off with an ease and rapidity quite remarkable. And I believe the same thing was true of most of her books. I've watched her when she was writing some funny piece of rhyme, and as her pen literally flew over the paper, I could hardly believe that she was actually composing as she wrote. One day 2 young girls were translating one of Heine's shorter poems. They had agreed to send their several versions to an absent friend, who on his part was to return his own to them. Mrs. Prentiss entered heartily into the plan, and in an hour had written as many as a dozen translations, all in English rhyme, and differing entirely one from the other. The stimulating effect on the genius of her companions was such that over 30 translations were produced in that one afternoon. In thinking of the ease with which Mrs. Prentiss would suddenly turn from grave to gay and the reverse, I often recall her answer when I one day remarked on this trait in her. "Yes, I have in me 2 very different natures. Did you ever hear the story of the dog, who by an accident was cut in 2, and was joined together by a wonderful healing salve? Unfortunately, the pieces were not put together properly, so 2 of his legs stood up in the air. At first his master thought it a great misfortune, but he found that the dog, when a little accustomed to his strange new form, would run until tired on 2 legs, and then by turning himself over he would have a fresh unused pair to start with, and so he did double duty. I am like that dog. When I am tired of running on one nature, I can turn over and run on the other, and it rests me. I want to spend a few minutes of this my birthday in talking with you in reply to your letter. To a Christian friend, New York, October 26, 1873. I want to tell you how I love you because you learn your lessons so easily, and how thankful I am that in your great trials and afflictions you have been enabled to glorify God. How small trouble is when set over against that. Is not Christ enough for a human soul? Does it really need anything else for its happiness? You will remember that when Madame Guyon was not only homeless, but deprived of her liberty, she was perfectly happy. A little bird am I. It seems to me that when God takes away our earthly joys and props, he gives himself most generously. And is there any joy on earth to be compared for a moment with such a gift? My husband has just come in and described the scene at Mrs. DeWitt's funeral, when her husband said, "Goodbye, dear wife, you have been my greatest blessing next to Christ." And he added, "And that I can say of you." This was very sweet to me, for I have faults of manner that often annoy him. I am so vehement, so positive, and lay down the law so. But I believe the grace of God can cure faults of all sorts, be they deep-seated or external. And I ought to be one of the best women in the world, if I am good in proportion to the gifts with which I am overwhelmed. I count it not the least of your and my mercies that we have been permitted to add 4 little children to the happy company above. No wonder you miss your darling boy, but I am sure you would not call him back. Have you any choice religious verses not in any book that you would like to put into one I am going to set up? To the same, November 12th. I want you and your mother to know what I am now busy about, hoping it may set you to praying over it. When I asked you for bits of poetry, I meant pieces gleaned from time to time from newspapers. My plan was to make a compilation, interspersing verses of my own anonymously. But Mr. Randolph has convinced me that it is my duty and privilege to have the little book all original, and to appear as mine, and in unexpected ways my will about it has been broken, and I have ceased from all morbid shyness about it, and am only too thankful that God is willing thus to use me for his own glory. Of course I shall meet with a good deal of misapprehension and disgust from some quarters, but not from you or yours. It is a comfort, on the other hand, to think of once more ministering to longing or afflicted souls, as I hope to do in these lines, written for no human eye. You say Jesus is pained when his dear ones suffer. I hardly think that can be. Tender sympathy he no doubt feels, but not pain. If he did, he would be miserable all the time. The world is so full of misery. When I look back over my own life, the precious times were generally seasons of great suffering. So much so that the idea of discipline has become a hobby. But one can only learn all this by experience. Mrs. Blank says she never sings the verse containing, "E'en though it be a cross that raiseth me," and that little children never talk in that way to their mothers, and therefore we ought not to talk so to God. I did not argue with her about it, but I felt thankful that I could sing and say that line very earnestly, and had been taught to do so by the Spirit of God. To a friend in Texas, New York, December 1st, 1873. I am glad you like Faber better on a closer acquaintance. He certainly has said some wonderful things among many weak and foolish ones. What you quote from him about Thanksgiving is very true. Our gratitude bears no sort of comparison with our petitions or our sighs and groans. It is contemptible in us to be such thankless beggars. As to domestic cares, you know Mrs. Stowe has written a beautiful little tract on this subject, Earthly Care, a Heavenly Discipline. God never places us in any position in which we cannot grow. We may fancy that he does. We may fear we are so impeded by fretting petty cares that we are gaining nothing, but when we are not sending any branches upward, we may be sending roots downward. Perhaps in the time of our humiliation, when everything seems a failure, we are making the best kind of progress. God delights to try our faith by the conditions in which he places us. A plant set in the shade shows where its heart is by turning towards the sun, even when unable to reach it. We have so much to distract us in this world that we do not realize how truly and deeply if not always warmly and consciously, we love Christ. But I believe that this love is the strongest principle in every regenerate soul. It may slumber for a time, it may falter, it may freeze nearly to death, but sooner or later it will declare itself as the ruling passion. You should regard all your discontent with yourself as negative devotion, for that it really is. Madame Guyon said boldly but truly, "Oh mon Dieu, plutôt pécheur que superbe." And that is the consoling word I feel like sending you today. I know all about these little domestic fixes that spoil the vines and sympathize with you in yours. But if some other trial would serve God's purpose, he would substitute it. To a young friend, New York, December 3rd, 1873. I was interested in what you wrote about Miss G and of Dr. C's meeting. You say she spends her time in young works of benevolence. This shows that her piety is of the genuine sort. It is hard to have faith in mere talk. It is a great mystery to me that while we meet with negative faults in ordinary prayer meetings, we find so many positive faults in more earnest ones. Perhaps there is less of self in those who conduct them than we imagine. I always regret to see talk to each other supplant address to God in such meetings. Always. As to Miss Blank and others making a creed, as you say, out of their experience, I think it may be accounted for in this way. They come suddenly into possession of thoughts and emotions to which others are led gradually. They are startled and overwhelmed by the novelty of the revelations, and at once form a theory on the subject. And having formed the theory, they fall to so interpreting the Bible as to support it. Those who reach the point they have reached more slowly are not startled, and do not need to form theories or seek for unscriptural expressions with which to declare what they have learned. They are probably less self-conscious because they have not been aiming to enter any school formed by man, but have been simply following after Christ, hardly knowing what they expect will be the result, but getting a great deal of sweet peace on the way. And they also acquire, gradually, a certain kind of heaven-taught wisdom, whose access comes not with observation, blessed truths revealed by the Holy Spirit, full of strength and consolation. At any rate, this is as far as I have come to. There may be oceans of knowledge I have yet to acquire, which will modify or wholly change my range of thought. And according to what light I have, I am inclined to advise you not to confuse yourself with trying to believe in or experience this or that because others do, but to get as close to Christ as you can every day of your life, feeling sure that if you do, he, by his Spirit, will teach you all you need to know. There has been, to my mind, during the last few weeks, something awe-inspiring in the sense I have had of the way in which God instructs his ignorant, forgetful, stupid children. Such goodness, such patience, such love. And on the other hand, our amazing coldness and ingratitude. To Mrs. Smith, New York, December 21st, 1873. I wanted to see you before you left, but it would have been cruel to add to the cares and distractions amid which you were hurrying off. I am reading with great interest the letters of Sarah Coleridge. What strikes me most in her is that knowing so much of her, one still feels what lots there is more to her one does not know. 22nd. Strangely enough, in writing you last evening, I forgot to tell you how much prayer is being offered for you and your husband, and what intense sympathy is expressed. Dr. Vincent said he could not bear to hear another word about his sufferings. Mrs. L. said, "I do love that man." Mrs. D., herself all knotted up with rheumatism, would hardly speak of herself when she heard he was so ill, and this is only a specimen of the deep feeling expressed on all sides. I am glad you find anything to like in my poor little book. I hear very little about it, but its publication has brought blessing to my soul, which shows that I did right in thus making known my testimony for Christ. My will in the matter was quite overturned. The poor little book appeared under the title of Religious Poems, afterwards changed to Golden Hours, Hymns and Songs of the Christian Life. In a letter of Mrs. Prentiss to a friend, written in 1870, occurs this passage. Most of my verses are too much my own personal experience to be put in print now. After I am dead, I hope they may serve as language for some other hearts. After I am dead. That means, oh ravishing thought, that I shall be in heaven one day. Until the fall of 1873, her husband and 2 or 3 friends only knew of the existence of these verses, and their publication had not crossed her mind. but shortly after her return from Dorset she was persuaded to let Mr. Randolph read them. She soon received from him the following letter: "The poems must be printed, and at once." We, that is, the firm living in Yonkers, read aloud all the pieces, except those in the book, at one sitting, and would have gone on to the end, but that the eyes gave out. Out of the lot, 3 or 4 pieces were laid aside as not up to the standard of the others. The female member of the firm said that Mrs. Prentiss would do a wrong if she withheld the poems from the public. This member said he should give up writing, or trying to write, religious verses. I am not joking. The book must be printed. We were charmed with the poems. Some of them have all the quaintness of Herbert, some the simple subjective fervor of the German hymns, and some the glow of Wesley. They are, as Mrs. R. said, out of the beaten way, and all true. So they differ from the conventional poetry. If published, there may be here or there some sentimental soul, or some soul without sentiment, or some critic who dotes on Robert Browning and doesn't understand him, or on Morris or Rossetti, because they are high artists, who may snub the book. Very well. For compensation you will have the fact that the poems will win for you a living place in the hearts of thousands, in a sanctuary where few are permitted to enter. A day or 2 later, Mr. Randolph wrote in reply to her misgivings: "If I had the slightest thought that you would make even a slight mistake in publishing, I would say so. As I have already said, I am sure that the book would prove a blessing in 10,000 ways, and at the same time add to your reputation as a writer." She could not resist this appeal. The assurance that the verses would prove a blessing to many souls disarmed her scruples, and she consented to their publication. Most of them, unfortunately, bore no date. But all or nearly all of them belong to the previous 20 years, and they depict some of the deepest experiences of her Christian life during that period. They are her tears of joy or of sorrow, her cries of anguish, and her songs of love and triumph. Some of them were hastily written in pencil, upon torn scraps of paper, as if she were on a journey. Were they all accompanied with the exact time and circumstances of their composition, they would form, in connection with others unpublished, her spiritual autobiography from the death of Eddie and Bessie in 1852 to the autumn of 1873. As she anticipated, the volume met in some quarters with anything but a cordial reception. The criticisms upon it were curt and deprecatory. Its representation of the Christian life was censured as gloomy and false. It was even intimated that in her expressions of pain and sorrow there was more or less poetical affectation. Alluding to this in a letter to a friend, she writes: "I have spoken of the deepest, sorest pain, not of trials, but of sorrow, not of discomfort, but of suffering. And all I have spoken of, I have felt. Never could I have known Christ, had I not had large experience of him as a chastiser. You little know the long story of my life, nor is it necessary that you should. But you must take my word for it that if I do not know what suffering means, there is not a soul on earth that does. It has not been my habit to say much about this. It has been a matter between myself and my God, but the result I have told, that he may be glorified and that others may be led to him as the foundation of life and of light. I refer, of course, to the book of verses. I never called them poems. You may depend upon it, the world is brimful of pain in some shape or other. It is a hurt world, but no Christian should go about groaning and weeping. Though sorrowing, he should be always rejoicing. During 20 years of my life, my kind and wise physician was preparing me, by many bitter remedies, for the work I was to do. I can never thank or love him enough for his unflinching discipline." Even the favorable notices of the volume, with 2 or 3 exceptions, evinced little sympathy with its spirit or appreciation of its literary merits. But while failing to make any public impression, the little book soon found its way into thousands of closets and sick rooms and houses of mourning, carrying a blessing with it. Touching and grateful testimonies to this effect came from the East and the farthest West, and from beyond the sea. The following is an extract from a letter to Mr. Randolph, written by a lady of New York eminent for her social influence and Christian character. "The Book of Heart Hymns is wonderful, as I expected from the specimens which you read to me from the little scraps of paper from your desk. Do you know that I lived on them? The school, and my expectation is from thee, and was greedy to get the book that I might read them again and again. And behold, the volume is full of the things I have felt so often, expressed as no one ever expressed them before. I am overwhelmed every time I read it. Mr. Blank and the children have quite laughed at Mamma's enthusiasm over a book of poems, as I am considered very prosaic. I made C read 2 or 3 of them, and he surrenders. N, too, who is full of appreciation of poetry as well as of the best things, is equally delighted. I carried the volume to a sick friend and read to her out of it. I wish you could have seen how she was comforted. I do not know Mrs. Prentiss, but if you ever get a chance, I would like you to tell her what she has done for me. A highly cultivated Swiss lady wrote from Geneva, "What a precious, precious book! And what mercy in God to enable us to understand and say amen from the heart to every line. It was he who caused you to send me a book I so much needed, and I thank him as much as you." End of chapter 13, part 3.